EDClass Limited. Breaking barriers to learning.
Hello and welcome back to EDClass's podcast. As you probably now know, EDClass is officially accredited as a provider of online education by the Department for Education, so please get in contact to see how we can assist you. But today, what an amazing guest we have lined up. It's Deputy CEO from the ADHD Foundation neurodiversity charity, Emma Weaver. Today, we're going to be talking about neurodivergence, ADHD, and how we can effectively support behaviour and attendance for those struggling with certain conditions. So firstly, Emma, thank you for joining us. I saw you at a conference earlier this year and was blown away by your knowledge, your expertise, and how you conduct yourself. So I thought we had to get you on the podcast to talk about some topics. But firstly, could you just talk to us about what you do, all about you and the charity you work for?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Tom. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to come and kind of introduce the ADHD Foundation neurodiversity charity to you. My name's Emma Weaver, as you said, Deputy CEO of the ADHD Foundation. And our role, we are a Liverpool-based charity, but we work nationally. And I suppose our job is to help people to better understand neurodiversity. We very much promote a strengths-based approach to neurodevelopmental conditions. So it's about working with children and adults with the likes of ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia. There's lots and lots of neurodivergent conditions. Our job is to be able to work with those individuals, work with the sectors that they either work in or the education settings that they attend to help people just to better understand how do we support individuals with neurodivergence and help them to thrive and get the best out of life, because there is so many wonderful things about being neurodivergent that we can promote, and particularly support children and young people to recognise that it shouldn't be a barrier. And actually, the likes of ADHD and autism can be a real asset. It's just about helping children to understand what that asset is and how to really unpick that to help them to get the best out of their education.
Amazing stuff. Yeah, I've seen the work you guys do over there is phenomenal, and you're breaking that stigma about neurodivergence, ADHD, and how they can use it to build confidence and really fulfill their potential. So it's amazing stuff about what you're doing. So just focus on the ADHD to start off. Then it can be quite a complex issue, quite hard to comprehend sometimes, can't it? Can you just tell us exactly what it truly is? And I remember you saying there was 3 subtypes in your talk. So just give a bit of insight into what it's all about, really.
Yeah, of course. So ADHD, it stands for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Now, I always say whenever I do my training, unfortunately, the title of ADHD doesn't always help our understanding of it. Firstly, we've got the term deficit in there, and deficit would suggest that somebody was lacking something. It's certainly not the case when it comes to ADHD. Actually, when it comes to attention, people with ADHD are often paying attention to multiple things. So when we think about a classroom environment, they're often over-attentive to peripheral distractors, the people in the room, the information that's coming from the environment around them, which often leads to being overwhelmed by attention. It's difficult to pinpoint specific things to focus on because there's that much information that's coming in from the environment, from people, from teachers, and also from themselves as well. So the title ADHD doesn't really help us in that sense. We've also got that very negative word at the end, which is disordered. Now, and I say this all the time, my specialism is early years and child development. And the word disordered, labelling any child as disordered, labelling any human as disordered, just doesn't sit well at all. And this is where the neurodiversity movement is really unique, because it's about moving away from that deficit-driven language, moving away from terms like disordered and using more strengths-based. Because when it comes to ADHD, there are many, many strengths. There are 3 characteristics. Now, the medical model, which is kind of the deficit-driven model that we refer to, uses the term symptoms. At the foundation, we prefer to use characteristics or traits. It's a much more strengths-based positive way of labelling them. Now, there are 3: hyperactivity, impulsivity, and inattention. Now, hyperactivity is often the one we focus on. And hyperactivity tends to be lots of movement. Now, when we think of hyperactivity, we think of boys. Usually boys that are on the go, busy boys on their feet, struggling to sit still, moving around our classrooms. But what we also know is that hyperactivity can look very different in girls. And we hear the phrase cognitive hyperactivity, which can be really common. Cognitive hyperactivity basically is fast-paced thinking, a mind that doesn't switch off, a mind that has 1,000,001 thoughts, one after the other. And sometimes it can be difficult to pinpoint and pin down one of those thoughts to be able to then really concentrate on it. But it's also one of the assets of ADHD. Now, I work at the ADHD Foundation. Lots of our team have ADHD. The wonderful thing about working here is that fast-paced mind, constantly having new ideas. Conversations are never boring. We're always thinking about the next thing, always 10 paces ahead because of that ability to really think in that mind map way. We also have the second characteristic, which is impulsivity. And impulsivity is also known as behaving before thinking. So there's a wonderful American speaker called Ned Hallowell, and he talks about the ADHD brain being a little bit like a Ferrari engine, but with bicycle brakes. And that's kind of the best way to explain impulsivity. It's that kind of behaving, and then potentially the thought will come out afterwards. Now, in a classroom environment, that might be a child that shouts out. That might be a child that in an outdoor, unstructured time might behave in an impulsive way. Now, when we look at impulsivity kind of through the lens of strength, we know that many children who are impulsive are also really engaged. Whenever I do classroom observations, I'm really lucky. I get to go into lots of schools and observe lots of learning. And the impulsive child is always the one with the hand up, desperate to give the answer, desperate to tell you what they know, desperate to engage with the teacher and with the people around them. Now, it's not to disregard the fact that that can be really tricky. You know, I've worked in education for a long time. As a teacher, that can be really hard to manage impulse. It's just about having the right strategies to support impulse, because actually an engaged child is a child that wants to learn. And we've got to really harness that with ADHD, because connection is a massive motivator for people with ADHD. And then the final characteristic is what we refer to as inattentive. Now, inattentive, old language, luckily we don't use this anymore, but we used to say it was sluggish cognitive tempo. Now, luckily, that isn't a phrase that we refer to. But what it basically means is somebody with the inattentive characteristic of ADHD might just take a little bit longer to process information. So they will process it, they just need some space and some time to be able to do that. Now, you've got 3 subtypes, which you referred to before, so you don't have to have all 3 to be diagnosed with ADHD. You've got the predominantly hyperactive impulsive, and I've seen this loads in classrooms. These are our kids that are on their feet, they're walking around our classrooms, they're often kind of doing things that might not look like they're wanting to engage in the learning, but these are the children, the minute you ask them a question, they can respond and tell you exactly what you've just been teaching the rest of the classroom. They are sustaining attention. They just need all of that movement to be able to do it. You've then got the second subtype, which is predominantly inattentive. So that would be a child or young person with more of the inattentive characteristics and less of the hyperactive impulsive. And then you've got the final one, which is the combined. And the combined is when you have all 3 of the characteristics in the mix.
Wow. It just shows how much is really involved with it. You know, it's difficult to diagnose and recognize, I guess, you know, exactly who's got what. I was just focusing on that impulsivity aspect as well. What would you suggest in strategies? Because I know a lot of teachers might overcome this one, especially. How do you think, what strategies can you implement to overcome that aspect and support the students in that way, do you think?
Yeah, a top tip that I often give in any of my training is I'll talk about, we call it the thought bubble piece of paper. So in a classroom setting, if you've got a child that impulsively shouts out, as I said, that's an engaged child. We want to harness that. But it can be difficult because it can get in the way of other children's opportunities to talk. Now, I saw this in a secondary school and they raved about it. And then I've told lots of schools to try this. It's a piece of paper, and on that piece of paper, you have pictures of bubbles, and they're called the thought bubble. You laminate the piece of paper and you have it on the table next to the child. So when they have something that they want to say and like a burning desire to tell you something, you just ask them to put it on the thought bubble. So it's motivating, it's encouraging. That's a great idea. Get it on your thought bubble for me. Now you can use post-it notes. You can use whiteboards with whiteboard markers. If we can externalize the thought at the time that the child has had the thought, it really helps them to be able to then remember it. Because one of the key characteristics of ADHD that can often impact learning is weak working memory. And working memory is the ability to remember information whilst you're in the middle of doing something. So if you can get it on a piece of paper, if you can get it out of the mind and externalized onto something, you're making it concrete, which then also supports working memory too. So that externalize as much as possible can really help.
Yeah, I like that aspect, externalizing it and making sure they're getting it down on paper. That's a really good top tip. That I know a lot of the children we've got on the platform at EDClass, they struggle with, got ADHD, a lot of neurodivergent challenges, and they found that once they've got that one-to-one support, they can really thrive and really build their confidence in that way. So yeah, it's really good to have you on. Now I know you said in your talk when I saw you earlier that I think that you said there were 7 out of 10 people who excluded actually are neurodivergent, and then a child with ADHD could be around 3 to 5 years behind their peers. So just how important is it, to provide the right support for these children so they can receive better outcomes and experiences in their education?
It's so important. What the research tells us time and time again that the earlier we can provide intervention, the better the life outcomes are for children and young people. And it's the same with mental health conditions as much as it is with neurodivergent conditions as well. For ADHD in particular, there is so much we can do. I think this is why I love working in the field of neurodiversity, because there are just simple tweaks that we can make in our teaching practice and in our home environments as well that can really help. For lots of children, and I was working with a young person not that long ago, and for him to be able to concentrate in the classroom, he needed to be on his feet. The simple strategy that he needed was a standing desk. Now, he was explaining to me prior to having the standing desk, sitting, he got this like physical itch all over his body. He said that's the only way he could explain it. He felt like he wanted to pop when he was made to sit. The minute he stood up, he felt a bit freer. He was less agitated. He was less distracted by his body, not feeling kind of aligned and how it needed to be in preparation for learning. And then he was able to learn and concentrate. So a simple intervention such as a standing desk, which actually doesn't take much more in our classrooms, can be the difference between a child feeling comfortable, feeling regulated, and then being able to concentrate on a task and then ultimately learn and get the best out of education. We also know with ADHD that there's a high prevalence of co-occurrence of mental health difficulties as well. So being mindful of that, recognising that people with ADHD really benefit from therapeutic interventions, opportunities to talk, but also opportunities to understand themselves. I'm a massive believer, if you're working with a child with ADHD, we need them to understand what their ADHD means to them. We've got some great booklets on our website that you please feel free to have a little look at. They're booklets for children, for teenagers, for adults, and they're all about understanding your ADHD. So if anybody's kind of wanting to speak to a young person about ADHD, I'd recommend have a little look at those booklets. They're all free to download from our website.
That's amazing. Yeah, definitely have to reach out to that. I know. I think what we found as well is building those meaningful relationships and finding what works out best for them, and then you can implement the better strategies to overcome what they're struggling with. In terms of just moving on to like attendance as well, because I know certain students, especially with like ADHD, they might struggle to get out of bed in the morning. From a neurodivergent point of view, how can we change the perspective, understanding of certain student situation, and what strategies could be introduced there, do you think, to improve their attendance and getting them more motivated?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, your point about motivated by relationships is key. Having an adult that I want to get out of bed for and that I want to come and see and work with. That, as I said earlier on, a lot of children with ADHD are motivated by connections and by knowing somebody that cares about them and wants to kind of support them and be there for them. But we also know with ADHD, every human being has got something called our circadian rhythms. And your circadian rhythm is your body's 24-hour clock. So if ever you have any time off work, if you're anything like me, I still wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning. I know I've got to lie in, but my body can't help it. And that's my circadian rhythm. Your circadian rhythm also it kind of governs when you feel hungry. So you get a bit of an idea. Must be about 12 o'clock now because my stomach's starting to grumble. So our circadian rhythms help us to know what time of day it is, the hour, kind of where we are in the kind of 24-hour cycle. Is it nearly bedtime? People with ADHD have a difference in their circadian rhythms. So their circadian rhythms aren't always the same as other people's, which means that actually sometimes they're not as sleepy at the same time as everybody else. So lots of people with ADHD will sleep much later, which then that can then lead to difficulties getting up the next morning. Now, if we were to really challenge kind of how we teach, and this is where online teaching platforms can be so helpful, because actually if we were just to push the start time back from 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock, where we give that child enough sleep time based on their circadian rhythms so that it was kind of tailored to that individual child, is potentially likely to get more engagement because they've had the quota of sleep that they need. And this is what we often say. Sometimes we have to lean into the biology of ADHD. There's something we call the neurobiology, which is the biology of the brain and what's happening. Neurodevelopmental conditions all sit within neuroscience. So actually, if we understand neuroscience a lot more, we can then understand how we need to tailor our support to children. So yeah, we talk about reduced timetables, but we also talk about delayed starts. I talk at primary about soft landings. Lots of our children come in at 8:30, quarter to 9. As soon as they land, there's an expectation that they do something. In the school that I worked in, they had thinking books. So the children had to sit and start writing. But actually, lots of kids with ADHD, 40% of children with ADHD are likely to be dyslexic as well. So if you start the day doing a writing task, and that's one of your challenges because of the nature of your neurodivergence, you're starting with a barrier. So a soft landing might be some soft play. It might be playing with kinetic sand. It might be some Lego. Just landing into the learning space without there being an expectation to do something that might be a challenge. And that might be the difference between a child being motivated to come in or demotivated to attend school.
No, that's great. That's great advice. Really good. I was saying, because a lot of students we have as well, having that online education aspect, it allows them to, work at their own pace, allows them to fulfill their educational potential comfortably, not being pressured. But I just wanted to ask, actually, on the flip side, perhaps, to this, how can we make sure, that children being prepared for adulthood, especially, going into the workforce, there's a set time you need this to be here at that time. How can we ensure, that they're still comfortable with their education, but making sure that, they're getting well prepared for adulthood to ensure that, they are going to be comfortable once they leave school? What do you think we could do in that aspect?
Yeah, that's a huge kind of area at the moment, Tom. A lot of the work that we're doing is around transitions into adulthood. Because you're right, there are certain kind of expectations when we go into the world of work, that we start at 9, that we finish at 5 in a lot of jobs. I'm a huge believer in self-advocacy, in supporting young people as they're going through our secondary years to really understand themselves, to really understand what they need, and then to really think about, based on what they need, what strategies do we need to work on to support them. Now, we talk about helping to build tolerance for lots of things, because actually sometimes if we're too protective, if we provide too much, that kind of, when they then go into the world of work, it can leave them vulnerable. So it's a gradual approach, I suppose, as they're transitioning into that kind of latter phase of your secondary years, knowing that we're going into the world of work, opportunities for work-based placements, to learn those skills, to understand actually the mechanisms of my behaviour or of my routines will be different when I hit the workplace. So lots of opportunities to be out and experience that as well, in order to develop those mechanisms whilst you're still in the safety of your education setting too.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great idea, pushing them into a bit more workplace placement idea. That's great. I've actually used some of what you said in your talks when I like to do some public speaking myself now. And one of the good things you said was that I think 30% of business owners are actually neurodivergent themselves now, which is just extraordinary. So it just highlights, with that right support, that they can get into the right place, the right mindset, and able to have that confidence to go into the workplace, really. In terms of like an overarching strategy, then I know there's probably loads that you can do, but in terms of just supporting ADHD, neurodivergence, behaviour and attendance, what would you say is arguably one of the best strategies teachers could implement to help support students?
Oh, that's a massive question. There's so many. Big, huge one. It's funny, I've worked at the foundation for the last 7 years, and each year there's something else that I tend to go, oh, I like this. This is something I kind of really bring to a lot of my conversations. But I'm finding myself talking a lot more about proprioceptive development. It's really common that people with ADHD have a weakness with what we call the proprioceptive sense. Now, your proprioceptive sense is your core control. So it's how you sit upright for long periods of time. But it's also how you know how to coordinate your movements, so your limb movements in a physical space and in time. Now, people with ADHD can sometimes find that difficult. Now, if you've got a difficulty with your proprioceptive sense, you go seeking proprioceptive feedback. So what a proprioceptive kind of seeking child might do in our classrooms is they might want to be on their feet a lot. They might be seeking rough and tough kind of play or interactions. They might be needing to really feel the push and pull of their bodies. So at primary school, I see a lot of climbers. I see it at secondary school. I was working with a year 7 girl, and whenever she walked down the corridors, she used to pull her body up on door frames. She just used to just love to feel that resistance and that heavy weighted kind of response. Now, when you get that, you feel regulated, your body feels right. And I think for many people with ADHD, we've got to get the body right in order to support the mind. And it's the physical that we need to support first. So we're often talking in our training about introducing proprioceptive programs into the school day. So it's a program where it's like a little bit of a mini assault course, really. And in that assault course, step 1 is an activity that raises the heart rate, but that gets the head moving forwards, backwards, side to side, and up and down. So star jumps, bunny hops, row your boat, anything like that that gets the head moving. Second step is proprioceptive. So anything that's going to get the body crossing itself. So crawling, climbing, stretching, balance beams, anything where a young person has got to motor plan. So really think about what are my limbs doing in conjunction with the rest of my body. And then the final step is calming. So it might be a breathing exercise. It might be, if they're younger, wrapping them in a fleecy blanket, put them on your knee and rocking them from side to side. If they're older, it might be just doing a quick 2-minute meditation. What I love about proprioceptive programs is you can do them at any age. You just need to make the activities that you do appropriate to the age that you're working with. But ultimately, the feedback that we get is those children that access proprioceptive input at different times throughout the day are better regulated. So from an emotional perspective, they feel better. From a learning perspective, they're better. But also from a behavioural, being able to manage those feelings that they've got in their body, which often feels tense and uncomfortable. Proprioceptive program just is a really great proactive strategy. So that would be my top tip, I think, Tom, just to kind of make sure that we've got lots of weighted activities, resistance activities throughout the day to kind of feed that physical need that lots of our kids have.
Oh yeah, I love that. That's a great tip. Really, really good tip. I know I was just about to go on about how it could be used at any age, and you've said that, going from primary all the way up to secondary, which is great. I know we're focusing a lot on safeguarding this month as well, and I know students with neurodivergent challenges, ADHD, they can be quite perceptive and vulnerable to to a lot of risks out there. What do you guys suggest the charity to ensure that children are as safe as possible, whether it be online or be in the mainstream class itself, to ensure they are safe, they're well, and they can actually focus more intently on their education?
I think it's all about intervention. I think for lots of children with ADHD, access to solid regular intervention is really important. So access to talking therapies, if that's what a child would benefit from. Psychoeducation, I've said it a couple of times in this podcast, is helping children to understand the characteristics of their ADHD. If you've got a child that you're working with that's predominantly hyperactive impulsive, supporting them to recognise what impulsivity means, and that actually impulsivity does link to risk and risk-taking behaviours. And then once we label it as something, we can then provide the strategies and the support. We use a coaching strategy called Stop, Think and Do, which is great. People with ADHD love rhythm and rhyme often. We remember things better when it's in like a rap or in like a mantra. Stop, think and do. We can start that mantra from very, very early on. I use it in some of our nurseries here in Liverpool. So when a child is about to do an activity, you start labelling. Before we start, let's stop. Let's have a think. What do we need? What resources do you need? Who might help you? Then let's do it. Now you can apply Stop, Think and Do at every age group. And when they're in their secondary school years, before they start a written task, before you start, let's stop, let's think. Have you got all the materials that you need? Where are you going to start on the paper? Have you remembered and collected all the information that you need? Once you've done that, then you do it. Then do it. Let's do the activity. Now, Stop, Think and Do, if we can use that as a phrase that we say repeatedly to children through education, ideally, what we would hope would be that then when they're out and about in the community, before the chance of taking a risk, stop, think and do comes into the mind. So before I'm in a moment where I might do something impulsively, let's just apply that mantra. Let's stop, let's think, is it safe? Am I safe? Are the people around me safe? Is it legal? Is it appropriate? And should I be doing this? And that's where early intervention is key. When we start these strategies very, very early on, then the expectation or the hope is that a child would have a much more solid understanding as they get older.
Love that. Stop, think and do. I think I'll have to start thinking about using that myself, to be honest. But yeah, I totally agree with the intervention as well. Strategies, making sure you get in early, as early as possible to ensure the students are going to progress at the best rate possible, help them fulfil their potential. So I couldn't agree more with that. I'd just like to ask your opinion on. I know you touched on it briefly earlier. On your opinion on online education, how beneficial and transformative can it be, such as, what we do here, positively reintegrating students and help support them academically and personally, especially those with ADHD and neurodivergence? How beneficial can it truly be, do you think?
I think it certainly has its place. I think for children who are struggling to attend school, for lots of children, the school environment is very overwhelming. I mean, the opportunity to be in a school environment from a social perspective obviously is key and really important. But I've also worked with lots of children that just struggle to step over the threshold. And actually the difficulties that they have is leading to them disengaging with education, not wanting to learn, not wanting to be involved in education. And actually, if there's an online opportunity for a child to feel safe and secure at home, I think COVID has taught us so much about different styles of education. And actually, if a child is able to learn and they're able to learn because they're at home and it's an online platform, or it's an online platform where they can still access it from the school environment, then I think it certainly has its place for those children that are struggling within our ed settings.
Yeah, definitely. As you touched on with the COVID, it's a lot of challenges have boomed massively. A lot of mental health issues, behavioural challenges. So yeah, it can be very beneficial in the long run. But Emma, you've been absolutely amazing this morning. Thank you so much for your time. Is there anything else you'd like to say about ADHD, neurodivergence, anything like that?
No, I think I'm good, Tom. But thanks for kind of giving me the opportunity, and I'm so excited to the podcast.
Where can people get some more information about what you guys do?
Yeah, so we've got a website, so adhdfoundation.org.uk. We've got a brilliant resources section on there with lots and lots of access to lots of information. We're also on all the social media platforms, so please feel free to follow us on them. Tend to find social media is a great place to see what's going on in the world of neurodiversity. It's a really exciting space right now because it's ever evolving. And you tend to find we retweet stuff from other people, or we have our own content on there as well. So yeah, the website and social media, please feel free to keep in touch with us.
Amazing stuff, Emma. Yeah, very good. Yeah, you got some great content out there. So everyone, please go out and check Emma out and the ADHD Foundation. Amazing stuff. Thank you, Emma.
Cheers. Thanks, Tom.
So that was Emma Weaver, a great talk there. If you found this interesting and would like to find an online alternative provision solution for some of your students, contact EDClass on 01909 568 338 or email mail@edclass.com. You can also subscribe to our YouTube and Spotify accounts for more upcoming webinars and podcasts.
EDClass Limited. Breaking barriers to learning.